Alright, so my name is Jen Southam. I'm actually going to take up the full 15-minute allotment. That was a nice segue, thank you, Bob, from poetry into prose. And I'm going to read an excerpt from my novel. And just to let you know, it kind of jumps around in time a little bit. It's 4 different perspectives on one event. It starts in September 1959, jumps forward all the way to November 1999, and I'll let you know when the time change happens. Wes, the 12-year-old badass that he was, strutted down the street toting a bucket full of snapper and whistling to no particular tune. He matched his pace to his growing hunger, knowing all he had to do was get the 7 3-pounders home, gut him up, throw him in a frying pan with some butter and onions, and voila, a West special. This recipe, along with accoutrements he would later discover, such as Dijon mustard and lemon pepper, would make up about 2/3 of his cooking repertoire for the rest of his life. He burst through the front door of the 2-bedroom apartment that he had spent the entirety of his not-so-childish childhood in, and gave the bare-bones living room a once-over. He didn't even notice the filth anymore. The centimeter of dust on everything, the faint stink of urine that clung to every porous surface. The radio spat out a Muzak rendering of an Elvis song, which gave his whistle a new verve. He set down his bucket and flung his kicks into the corner, at ease knowing that Joseph wouldn't be home for at least 2 hours. Happy hour didn't end till 8, and Wes had freed himself of the responsibility of scooping him up on the night that he had discovered his ability to land a proper punch. Ma? There was a pregnant pause with no response. Ma, you here? Wes thought he heard a faint whimper, followed by a muffled sob. He followed the sound, which began to more fervently escape from its suppression, to Sophie and Joe's bedroom. These days it was really just Sophie's room, as Wes couldn't remember the last time his father had made it past the couch, except when it was prayer time in the temple of the porcelain god. He tapped the door lightly, then cracked it open to reveal his mother, face down in bed, white knuckle clenching the pillow to her face, which was wet and red to its edges. Ma, what's wrong? He inched closer, extending a hand which froze and hovered just above Sophie's back. He wanted to place it gently on his mother's quaking shoulder, but was paralyzed by the fear of further heightening the emotion. His mother's melancholy wasn't anything new to him. In fact, he had become so accustomed to her tearful retreats to her room that he had learned to ignore them, just as he had learned to ignore the dirt-stained floors. But he could sense a difference here, which was confirmed when he glanced up and noticed a small suitcase beside the closet. As if Sophie had a third eye that had seen Wes register the strange piece of luggage, she sat up abruptly, wiping with her forearm the stream of snot that hung from her upper lip. Don't let them take me, Wes. She stared at his face, her bottom lip quivering, her eyes pleading. Take you where, Ma? She took his hand in hers, and as much as this surprised Wes, he let her. In fact, he liked it. It had been so very long since he'd had physical contact with his mom. In the past, during her up times, Sophie would kiss and hug him to the point where he had to shake her off. That was, if Joe didn't pry her off of him first. You'll make him a softie, woman, he would say. I don't need no fruitcake for a son. And it wasn't until during the last year, when her downs had successfully pinned her ups into the corner, that Wes had started to appreciate the excessive bursts of affection, even to miss them. That's how life too often works, disguising our blessings as burdens, and then hiding them away completely, unveiling the true burdens, so that we long for what we thought we loathed. Wes suddenly, almost involuntarily, threw his arms around his mother's neck, clumsily climbing onto the bed to fully receive the desperate hug that she delivered in return. I don't want to go, I don't want to. She sobbed into his shoulder and stroked her hair with a newfound gentleness. Just as he felt the almost alien sensation of warmth and love trickle into his heart, its flow was plugged by the sound of Joe clearing his throat. And the hug ended just as suddenly as it had been initiated. Go pack your bags, Wes. Despite his father's monotone voice, his cold stare, Wes felt a flicker of confused relief. of something that almost resembled hope. "Are we going on a trip, Pop?" Joe, with meanish redress, shook his head. "Your ma needs to go away for a while, to, a farm. She just needs some rest. You're gonna go to your Aunt Sadie's for a few months." "A few months? But, hurry up, your taxi will be here in 10 minutes. Wes, now on the verge of tears, turned to his mother with a million questions in his eyes, but hers had already glazed over. Her shoulders slumped, her jaw slack. September 5th, 1959, Part 2. Sadie Selden paced the porch of her compact 4-bedroom house. She was heavy with guilt for not being able to do more for her sister, not being there to hold her hand, which she knew wasn't part of her brother-in-law's repertoire. What she could do was receive her nephew with the kind of warmth that she spread equally and generously amongst her own 4 children. If it weren't for Wes's solid relationship with his cousins, especially Ricky, only a year his junior, Sadie would have been worried about what a tough cookie he'd be to crack. She knew, though, that no matter how much of his childhood her kids would drag out of Wes, there would still be so many unanswered questions, so many conflicting emotions. So the first thing she would do would be to lay down the law of the land that would keep the separation from his parents from arresting Wes's spirit. Sadie had vowed to herself that whatever Wes asked, she would answer him honestly, brutally if necessary. She didn't believe in sugarcoating things, as too sweet a view of the world could only make its true tastes viler. And she vowed that whatever he confessed to feeling, she would accept unconditionally and validate to no end. Too often in life, people say to us, "Don't feel sad," or "Stop feeling so guilty." But that's like saying, "Don't breathe." If we could pick and choose our feelings, life would be fucking roses all the time. Just push the all is peachy button and dopey grin your way through it all. But that's not life. And if it were, it'd be really fucking boring in Sadie's book. However, if she could find Sophie's happy button, she supposed it would be a better alternative. But Sadie wouldn't coddle Wes, that was for certain. She would stick it to him when he fell short or talked back. She'd inject him with the same unconventional survival skills that she had provided her own children with, like how to toss canned vegetables on the floor of a supermarket and demand a discount for the damaged goods, or how to roll off the hoods of slow-moving cars and sweetly suggest a cash payout in lieu of a hairy lawsuit. If Sadie was anything, it was resourceful. She did what she had to do to make the lives of her children more than just livable. With Wes, she'd aim for livable. Otherwise, the transition would be too much of a shock, and the transition back to his own parents' house, whenever Sophie was stable enough to care for him, would be a goddamn earthquake. But she needn't have worried, as she would have months to learn her nephew's ties and subsequently years to lend a hand to his molding. When the taxi finally pulled up, Sadie didn't even have a chance to bestow any motherly fortitude. The sound of the cab ignited the sound of the screen door slamming, and before she could even get a hello in, Ricky had grabbed Wes's bag from the boot, burped in his ear, and guided him through an elaborate handshake. Sophie felt a relieved smile creep into her lips, immediately comprehending the extent to which her son, not to mention the rest of her motley crew, would lessen her load. Wes had a brother now, and that brother's presence had instantly wiped the gloomy mess from Wes's mug. May 1993. When the girls walked through the door of Stacy and Rachel's 1-bedroom Greenwich Village apartment, Jess couldn't have been more elated. It had been one of those afternoons when the spirit of youth and the freedoms of adulthood had interlaced, and simply being alive was a gift. Memorial Day back in high school had just been a 3-day weekend that denoted increased crowds on the beaches, the onset of final exams, and a moderately elevated mood. But now is the kickoff to 3 full months of total freedom, which would be mostly enjoyed in parking lots and stadiums, paying homage to Jerry Garcia's licks. And until Summer Dead Tour commenced in June, they would dive head-on into the city that had always been just beyond their grasp. The fact that her best friend had opted to do the NYU thing gave Jess and the others in their circle a new level of access to Manhattan that didn't force them to scramble to catch commuter trains or justify tiptoeing through the doors of their parents' homes at the crack of dawn with enlarged pupils or finding new hiding places for their paraphernalia. The four girls, two of whom had already reached their 19th birthdays and two who were about to, were almost 2 years into their discovery of a counterculture where Stacy's extra pounds and Allie's social ineptitudes and Rachel's huge feet and Jess's scarred face no longer defined them. Music, specifically the kind of music that was conducive to semi-professional drug dabbling, had become their salvation, and it had become their incentive to finally smash the molds that they had always tried to squeeze themselves into for lack of exposure to other ideals. Their passage beyond the white picket fence had also led them to a sound group of male counterparts, also somewhat gawky, who loved and validated these girls as much as the girls loved and affirmed them. And these two groups of outcasts had discovered in each other a profound sense of beauty that manifested as their own anarchic in-crowd. Without fail, Rowan Ritchie's zeal provided the group's momentum. He was, as far as they were concerned, the king of cool. His fervor turned any ordinary day into a full-blown adventure. His approval instilled in his male comrades an air of confidence, and his increasingly handsome mug stirred the girls' newly adult loins. Jess and Rowan had been furtively seeing each other for several months. The secrecy had been decided upon for the sake of the group dynamic, as much to spare the feelings of Allie, who had not been as successful in concealing her mammoth crush on Rowan. This was the first real secret that Jess kept from her girlfriends, and as much as it pained Jess when Allie lamented about her unrequited love, the weight of that guilt didn't come close to dragging Jess down from the emotional heights that her clandestine meetings with Rowan preferred. It was a trade-off that later in life Jess would attribute some of her karmic balance to. But no matter how lofty our morals, or how strong our belief in golden rules, instant gratification and our inherent need to be loved will almost always force us to rationalize these kinds of compromises. The girls had returned to their landing pad after spending a day prancing around Central Park with the guys. They were in the market for a quick bong hit and a makeup session before heading out to shake their groove things at the Wetlands Preserve, a monumental music and environmental activism hotspot that, unbeknownst to them, would be put in its grave by real estate developers in less than 10 years' time. Stacy pressed play on the blinking answering machine. The first message was from Risa, requesting a return call from Jess. The girls chided Jess about her mom's tendency to check up a little too often, and as always, Jess shrugged it off. Ever since her parents split 4 years before, Jess and Risa had fallen into a symbiotic relationship that, no matter how combative, was always underscored by a fierce love bond. And now that Jess had reached an age that freed her from having to adhere to rules, she appreciated the constant concern. It certainly balanced out the total lack of parenting on her dad's part. The two messages that followed, each from Risa with increasing urgency in her voice, dissipated the teasing. The hoarse-voiced fourth message, "Jess, I need you to call me. I am at Ricky and Chandra's house," had Jess dialing her aunt and uncle's number with shaky fingers. "Mom, what's going on?" The girls gathered in tight as Jess's bottom lip began to quiver. A few hands brushed her shoulders, but she swiped them away. The girls retreated, exchanging silent what the fucks. "Is he okay?" Jess finally croaked out. She barely remembered swiping the lamp off the table, the shrieks that emanated from her that her friends would later confess had haunted them. Rowan's arm wrapped around her shoulder on the train back to Long Island that they coincidentally both wound up on, being picked up at the train station by her cousin Sally, Ricky's only daughter. The only images that would forever be imprinted in Jess's memory were dry heaving into the funeral home toilet after kissing the cold, taut cheek of her favorite uncle, and seeing her father cry for the second and last time. That day, the world tilted on its side. Most of Jess's ginormous extended family clung to whatever they could grab hold of, especially each other. But Wes slipped to the bow and over the rails, and his lifeboat had just disappeared into the current. November 1999. This is the last little short piece. There were times when Wes had wished that he believed in God. They were not the obvious times, times marked with intense fear or extreme loneliness, times when apathy had all but hollowed him out, not times when his faith in the human race stumbled, whereupon it would usually fall flat on its face, take as much time to hum and haw and lick its wounds as it required for something or someone to lift it up and propel it forward. Wes hadn't questioned his lack of faith when he'd reached his early 40s and started to receive calls informing him of the untimely deaths of his contemporaries, and when his loved ones in his parents' generation had started dropping off like flies. Not even now, in the hours before he would extinguish himself from the face of the planet, forfeit his opinion from any pressing future matters, plant tragic into the short list of words that would be used to recall him, did he have any desire to give form or recognition to one thing as being responsible for it all. In fact, today he was really fucking hoping that his atheism was on point. He had no interest in meeting his maker. And as much as the idea of giving Ricky a swift kick in the ass up in heaven amused him, not even the notion of potential reunions was enough to warrant a crossing of the line he had drawn so long ago. The only imminent goal Wes had was nothingness, not a nothingness defined by vast, empty black or white space, for to give it characteristics would be to make it something tangible, and he was striving here to demolish awareness entirely. The moments in Wes's life that did actually seem to call for something greater, some identifiable cosmic force, occurred when he was elated, when his spirit was at its highest heights. Now, some might say that buying into the idea of spirit automatically bought him God, that these concepts were sold in the same package, ineffectual without the presence of the other. But Wes's understanding of the spirit, which existed alongside the soul, had nothing to do with any supreme being. They were simply forms of energy that molded the nature of human beings, soul controlling instinct and intuition, and spirit parenting emotion and intellect. And there were times during the incongruent dance that the two were perpetually engaged in, when they stepped on each other's toes, or when the song would change and one would allow the other to take the lead. And there were some instances, albeit few and far between, when soul and spirit meshed so well, danced with such grace and in such fine alignment with the environmental factors that provided the music. And when this happened, Wes became aware of it as a result of a smile that wasn't even a tiny bit forced. Most people sought some semblance of God during the low points, as to have something outside of themselves at which they could point a finger of blame. Whereas, when Wes received blessings in the form of a wind that caught a sail at just the right angle, or a little freckle-faced girl clambering into standing position in the soft swell of a wave, or the most breathtaking woman on the planet's body on sub-zero mornings, he had wished for a target to which he could direct his gratitude.